Back in the day, before streaming, before CDs, we listened to music on albums. A vinyl disc spinning 33 and a third revolutions per minute brought us great music one side at a time. 20 or so minutes of music, 4 or 5 songs usually, that created a single listening experience. This format exposed us to other songs of the artist, not just the hits, and often flowed in an order that was created to build and maintain or mold a musical experience for the listener.
Sideshow brings musical experiences from the past to life today. Here, we discuss and review individual sides of record albums we have grown to appreciate and hope you will too. Welcome to The Sideshow.
Well, welcome to the Sideshow. Today, Mike has something that he's spinning up for us. So, Mike, what are we gonna talk about today?
Today, we're gonna talk about side one of the Jimi Hendrix Experience, Axis, Bold as Love.
Nice.
Most people that are into music, classic rock, have very familiar with Jimi Hendrix. And this was the second album released by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. It was released in late 1967. And it's really kind of interesting because 18 months before this album was released, I mean, nobody of any consequence in the music business had ever heard of Jimi Hendrix in any substantial way. Now, technically, that's not true because Hendrix, who was originally from the Seattle area, joined the army as a young man, and then after he got out of the army, he wasn't in for a full stretch. I don't know all the details, but in any case, he was in the army for a period of time and came out. And then, along with a friend of his from the army named Billy Cox, who he eventually played with, they knocked around, and Jimi Hendrix lived in Tennessee for a while. He was playing music as like a member of backing bands. He was on albums by the Isley Brothers, or at least some recordings by the Isley Brothers. Little Richard. I mean, he played in Little Richard's band for a period of time in the early 60s. An artist named Curtis Knight, who I probably would have never heard of if it weren't for the fact that Jimi Hendrix played in his backup band. And so he was knocking around doing stuff like that, which was referred to at the time as going on the Chitlin circuit. But I mean, he was in the background. I mean, he was, nobody knew his name other than the people he was directly working with and stuff like that. Well, he ended up in New York City, Greenwich Village, and in the summer of 1966 was playing at a place in Greenwich Village, and was kind of started to be noticed by music people. And one of the first people of consequence that really took note of him was a musician named John Hammond Jr., whose father, also named John Hammond, was well known as the discoverer of Bob Dylan. But in any case, John Hammond Jr. played straight blues music. And for a brief period of time, Jimi Hendrix, whose band at the time was called Jimmy James and the Blue Flames. Well, he was noticed by John Hammond and actually played in John Hammond's band for a brief period of time. And apparently a woman who was involved to some extent with Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones, took notice of Hendrix, let Keith Richards know. And Keith Richards apparently suggested to a man named Chaz Chandler, who had been the bass player for the band The Animals from England, Newcastle, England. And Chandler came to the United States during the late summer of 1966, saw Hendrix, and suggested that Hendrix come with him to England, which he did. And in England, Chandler hooked him up with two English white guys, Noel Redding, a bass guitar player, or a guitar player who played bass in the band, and then Mitch Mitchell, who was a drummer, and they formed the Jimi Hendrix Experience. And one of the first real gigs that they had was in October of 1966 in Paris, opening up for a then very popular French performer named Johnny Hallyday, and they really went over well. And shortly after these performances in France, they came back to London, and at some point in the fall of 1966 played at a club in London called the Bag o' Nails. and apparently like Paul McCartney, John Lennon, Mick Jagger, all these, English heavyweights in the music industry were there, and everyone's like, oh my God, this guy. And so he suddenly, within a handful of months, went from relative obscurity to kind of being the darling of swinging London in the fall of 1966, with the Beatles and the Stones all agog over him. So, I mean, he was on a very, very sudden, fast upward trajectory in his career. And they started recording in England. They put out some singles. Hey Joe was his first single. We're starting to record music for what became the first album, Are You Experienced? The first time that the Jimi Hendrix Experience performed in the United States was at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967, which I believe was in June of 1967. And he just, had this fabulous performance, very memorable, set his guitar on fire, played Wild Thing and Like a Rolling Stone and other of his own songs. Really went over big. And I don't know if Are You Experienced had even been released in the United States at that time.
The interesting thing about that is that the recording had been completed, and songs, to your point, singles had been released. The music was starting to get out there. The recording for that album ended in April, and even before the Monterey Festival, they had started recording on some sessions for the second album, right? For Axis Bold as Love. So it's kind of interesting how as the Monterey Festival and then the release of Are You Experienced, which is all kind of happening at around the same time, that's when they were writing a lot of and completing a lot of the work on this second album. So this whole, rocket-like experience and popularity obviously had a strong influence on what they were doing and building for the second album. But I think, to your point, it's like this was all happening very fast for the band. The creation of the music, the success, these different events, and that type of thing. Very interesting trajectory for a band.
And that's, I guess that sort of encapsulates the point I'm trying to make. I mean, once Hendrix came on the radar screen, people dug it, and things started happening. And the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967, sort of, some people would say, well, that was the real Woodstock, and the whole thing had gotten kind of commercialized and sort of overblown. And by the time of Woodstock, which was 2 years later, which Jimi Hendrix closed Woodstock. He was the final performance at Woodstock. It just coincidentally, but and so being one of these standout performances at the multi-day 1967 Monterey Pop Festival, that was a big deal.
Yeah,
and it was basically in between that performance and I believe it was on December 1st of 1967 that Axis Bold as Love, the second album, was released. But they had started it before that, but they really finished and it did the substance of the creation of the album took place in between the Monterey Pop Festival and the end of the year. The album came out. It's I've got a copy of the album here. It's very colorful, and it was a gatefold, so you could open it up.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of Hindu iconography, Hindu-related iconography, and which apparently Hendrix wasn't all that pleased about. I mean, he didn't, he didn't balk. I mean, the album came out; it's had the same cover forever, but he didn't necessarily want to be seen as endorsing it didn't necessarily reflect his true spiritual leanings or whatnot. But it's a very visually impressive cover, and and inside it's just black with the lyrics. There's a white image of the band, and it's a very visually striking album. The sort of album where if you got your head on and put the record on and sat down and looked at it, it was visually stimulating.
Yes.
But in any case, the songs on side one, which in my opinion is by far the better side on this particular album. And I guess before I start talking about the individual songs, I mean this album as a whole kind of gets lost in the shuffle between Are You Experienced, sort of the big,
the launch,
big news or big noise debut, and then Electric Ladyland, which was a double album, and by that point he was really, really, going strong. And this one just kind of sometimes gets lost in the shuffle in the meantime. And I think that that side one of Axis Bold as Love, in addition to being the best side on this album, may be the best side song for song out of all of Hendrix's music, in my humble opinion. Now, when you look at the first track on side one of Axis Bold as Love, it's evidence that refutes what I just said. Because basically, there's a spoken intro, but basically EXP, which is the title, 3 letters, all in capitals, EXP, is the title of the first track, and it's basically a minute and a half of screechy guitar distortion.
Yeah, and feedback.
And feedback. And now they did some interesting things. That was still relatively new in 1967. It's something that we're all familiar with now, listening to guitar distortion, heavy metal, blah, blah, blah. But it was still relatively new then. And there were some effects where the music was moving around in the stereo field, so as you were listening to it, it seemed like the music was going back and forth between the speakers. And so if you're sitting in the dorm and you're kind of knocked out, loaded on whatever chemicals, it was far out, man. That
really seems like when you take a look at why would they start this. I mean, the very first thing that someone's going to hear from this. I mean, I don't see a whole lot of other reasons aside from, okay, all the stoners out there, we're going to start with this, and they're going to say, wow, this is really weird, man. Yeah, and then we'll move into this music almost like an attention getter for the stoners. Otherwise, I'd agree with you. If this was the only work on this side, I wouldn't be looking at it in the same light as a very great side of music.
Well, and but in any case, I mean, it sort of sets the tone, so to speak, and moving into the next song, which is called "Up from the Skies," and it's a fairly as the feedback kind of fades out. Suddenly you move very smoothly into this. There's kind of a drum roll of sorts, not a drum roll, but a drum pattern, and then this kind of slow or relatively slow, kind of funky, wah wah pedal effect song, and Jimmy starts singing, and it's kind of like, the noise of EXP is sort of a presage for this someone going up into space and experiencing some sort of galactic something, and then coming back to Earth and finding the planet has changed.
Yeah.
I just want to talk to you. I won't do you no harm. And it's like I'm a visitor from elsewhere. But I take the song to be, it's not so much an alien that has come to visit the Earth, but it's an Earthling who traveled in space and has come back and found that the world has changed.
Yeah, it's got to be either that or it's an alien who has visited before. There's kind of like that change, that notion of change. Things have changed. Things have gotten worse. Whatever it might be, it's got to be one of those two. It's not just there's a comparison that seems to be going on in the song.
So in any case, it's however you want to look at it. You've got these three guys, Jimi Hendrix and his two sidekicks, in this bizarre regalia, kind of coming at you, and he's saying, "I want to know about the rooms behind your minds. I want to explore," and it's sort of it's a sort of a psychedelic curiosity. That sounds kind of pretentious, but that's kind of the context of the song.
It's also, especially when you think about Jimi Hendrix music, right? The first thing that pops into your mind is normally something a little heavier guitar than this one. This one is a little lighter, a little breezier, with what's coming at you. But that's coming from this EXP to this song. But yeah, it's an interesting song. It's light and it moves along. Definitely kind of a bridge from EXP into some things that'll get a little bit more, I guess, typical Jimi Hendrix guitar, I guess I'd say, as we move into the album.
Well, and a wah-wah pedal, which I believe is the effect that is used on this song. It was some sort of guitar pedal effect. But it's kind of jazzy even. And I think there are brushes used on the drums in parts of the song.
Yep.
But after so this space traveler of whatever kind, comes back to the Earth and is sort of checking things out, and the last verse of the song is, "So where do I purchase my ticket? I would just like to have a ringside seat. I want to know about the new Mother Earth. I want to hear and see everything." And then repeats that line, two more times. Yeah. I want to hear and see everything. Sort of the psychedelic warrior as seeker. And let's not soft pedal it. I don't think there is really any doubt that psychedelic drugs informed the creation of a lot of this music by Jimi Hendrix.
Yes.
I don't think that's reasonably subject to debate.
Yeah.
But speaking thereof, the second, it's actually the third track. From EXP to Up From the Skies, to more of a standalone song called Spanish Castle Magic. And a little bit of background, apparently the Spanish Castle was a night spot in the Seattle area that Hendrix would go to, and like bands would play.
Like a roadhouse. Yeah.
And so that's where the title comes from. but looking at the lyrics, I cannot help but glean that Hendrix is asking a woman to take LSD with him and let's see where it goes.
Yeah.
It's very far away. It takes about half a day to get there if we travel by my dragonfly. What the heck, Hang on, my darling. Hang on if you want to go. It's a really groovy place. A little bit of Spanish Castle magic. And then later on in the, just it's all in your mind, baby, and stuff like that. I mean, it's the imagery of the song suggests to me that he's talking about all you need to do is put this on your tongue and hold my hand, and you'll be amazed at what happens. Yep. Is basically what he's saying. I mean, do you disagree?
Oh no, I'd agree, and it is interesting that this is really the first kind of really heavy track on the on the side. Again, this is much more when I think of the first kind of music that pops into my head when someone says Jimi Hendrix.
Like
it's
Foxy
much more
Lady.
this stuff. Yeah, exactly. Just a much heavier track than what we've had before, and I think he was speaking about something that he knew a lot about. Potentially something that him and his friends had done. They'd had some Spanish Castle magic when they were hanging out at this roadhouse south of Seattle. So. Absolutely, I would agree with what he's talking at, what he's getting at in this song.
Yeah. What is it? The clouds are really low and they overflow with cotton candy and battlegrounds red and brown. But it's all in your mind. Don't think your time on bad things. Just float your little mind around. Look out! And then it boom, hang on, my darling. And apparently, so I mean, I think that's what it's about.
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
We're not going to argue about this. Yeah.
Foxy Lady, as it so happens, was one of the songs that was always in his live repertoire. And apparently this is really the only song on this album that stayed a part of Hendrix's live repertoire through the rest of his career. Spanish Castle Magic.
Yep.
The next track on side one is called Wait Until Tomorrow. And that is really a very tightly well-constructed pop song. Which is guitar, which is very guitar dominant, but it's not like Spanish Castle Magic, or like the wah wah effects in Up from the Skies. It's a pretty straightforward guitar tune, and but it's a poppier song than really the rest of the album, in both in terms of the music itself. And the lyrical content, which is basically just he's interested in this woman and she's blowing him off, and eventually her father shoots him.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Not an overly happy happy story. I mean, when I hear this, every time I hear the beginning of this song, I think about the song "Free Ride" by Edgar Winter. It really reminds me of that kind of do. It's a similar kind of style and ramp up to the song, and I think that's to your point about a poppier type of song. Again, still very well done, and not the most poppy of themes.
I think
it's there.
If you take away the your daddy just shot poor me, I mean even that is kind of couched in a. I mean, if you just take that away, it is very typical.
Yes, the boy-girl story. Yeah, exactly.
So, boy wants girl, girl lets boy think that he might have a shot. Turns out he doesn't have a shot.
But then her dad killed.
But dad did. Well, and like the background vocals, like the Noel Redding and Mitch Mitchell provide background vocals, and it has just a more pop feel. Now it's a '60s kind of psychedelic pop feel, but I wouldn't consider the song, unlike the predecessor. It's not the song isn't about drugs, and the music isn't particularly druggy. It's just good, but it's good guitar.
Yeah.
And it's not relying on distortion. It's not any fabulously impressive lead guitar. Just good and probably innovative at the time guitar playing.
And it's kind of interesting where the side has gone thus far, right? Just to this point. I mean, this is back when a time when it was common to have a number of shorter songs on a side, and this is no exception to that. But we start out with this weird kind of what the hell's going on space feedback jam. We get this lighter song, Up from the Skies. Then we go into this heavy, type thing back to something a little not going back to some soft song, but again a lot of variety, a lot of back and forth on this side. You're not getting there wasn't one state of mind that that Jimmy and this band was operating in when they were making this music.
Yeah, well, and that's a great point, and I think that the rest of the side kind of maintains that.
Yes,
really there's a lot of variety in the types of songs, and the song that follows, "Wait Until Tomorrow," is "Ain't No Telling," and "Ain't No Telling" it's a shorter song. It might be less than 2 minutes.
Yeah,
it's a relatively short song, but it is an aggressive rock song.
It moves very fast,
but it doesn't have that kind of smashing heavy metal sounding guitar like Spanish Castle Magic or Foxy Lady. This is a little more, it's a little cleaner, a little more specifically directed, and you can kind of compare Spanish Castle Magic to Foxy Lady. I think Ain't No Tellin' is more like Fire. That do 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 do.
Yep.
Do 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 do. I mean, this this just has a very urgent, in your face, kind of sharp edged guitar sound. And I think what the lyrics are about is the guy's got a mistress, he's or a girlfriend separate from either his wife or his full-time old lady back at the house, who's referred to as Cleopatra, and he's happy, so he's waking up and he's there ain't no telling when I'll see you again, but I hope it will be tomorrow. Yeah. And then he's got to go back to, because the sunrise is burning my eyes, baby, but I've got to leave, but I really hope to see you tomorrow. And then he complains about Cleopatra, his, who he's got to go back to, and then starts thinking again, there ain't no telling, but I hope it's tomorrow. And so it's just it's a relatively short, very straightforward piece of just, it's sharp. I think sharp edged is the, if the sound of a guitar can be like a hammer versus a sharp blade. Spanish Castle Magic is the hammer. This is the sharp blade. Just to the nature of the sound. And even though it's so short and to the point, it's a great song. It's an example of how Hendrix was able to find so many different ways of expressing whatever he was trying to express through his songs, using the guitar in different ways.
And also, when you look at this again, sometimes you've said all you need to say. Should we loop around and repeat the first verse and do another chorus and fill out the song? Well, I mean, if you're looking to fill some time, but I mean, a number of these songs are relatively short. in the big scheme of things. But again, sometimes you've captured a moment. He gets a vision in his mind of something. I should write a song about this. He can, and then it's done. There's it. He got his point across, and whether it's a very short song or not, which I think was certainly the case here.
So in any case, moving on, and consistent with what we've been talking about, but the variety of different types of songs that were put down on this side of the record, Little Wing is the next one. One of Hendrix's more famous ballads. I guess one of his more famous songs is, I guess, what I meant to say. It is a ballad of sorts, and it is really a beautiful song. It's basic lyrically. He's talking about some mistily gorgeous hippie chick that he saw walking around at the Monterey Pop Festival or something like that. And she's willing to give what she has to him, so to speak.
Well, I read something that said he actually was trying to capture the feeling at the Monterey Pop Festival that he had, and instead of just saying there was people, it's like he pictured if this festival was a girl, what would that be like? And again, this thing that gives and takes, and it's beautiful, and people are laid back, and it's flying around, and kind of an interesting take on that. Like, it clearly, the Monterey Pop Festival made an impression on him, that he thought this is a cool, beautiful place. I like being here. And it's like, what do I have to say about this? And whether it was the whole thing takes shape as a girl, or maybe a girl that he saw there or whatever, but it came out of that festival. I understand some of the guitar was stuff that he'd been working on for a while, but the idea and the notion and the driver of the song really came to him at the pop festival, which and that came in this song. And it's been Stevie Ray Vaughan covered this song, Sting covered this song, a lot of people have. It's a nice song, pleasant to the ear, to listen to.
The one, and Eric Clapton did a version of Little Wing, and it may be on the Derek and the Dominoes, Layla, or it may be on another album. I can't remember off the top of my head, but Clapton, who was an original admirer of Hendrix, like he was probably at that Bag of Nails concert in 1966 in London, but Clapton's version is no good. And it's the way that it's arranged is just
he fucked it up.
It's just not that good. Sting. I actually saw Sting perform around that time when I was living in Milwaukee, which was a very good concert. And they played Little Wing, and that was certainly much better than Clapton's version. And the Stevie Ray Vaughan version, if I'm thinking of what you're thinking of, it's an instrumental.
Yeah.
There's no singing, and I think that Stevie Ray Vaughan really kind of got to the heart of the actual music, the guitar music of the song, and that's a wonderful recording. I believe, and that might have been released posthumously after Stevie Ray Vaughan died. But it's a very enduring melody and ballad, and not a lot of lyrics, but one of the more profound, lasting statements that Hendrix really ever made.
Really great song.
And only one more song on side one, which follows Little Wing, called "If Six Was Nine," which is probably the most substantial song musically on the side. took some of the kind of an actual song with lyrics, combined with some of the sort of sonic exploration, not unlike some of the parts of Third Stone from the Sun on Are You Experienced. It was used. The first part of the song was used as part of the soundtrack for the movie Easy Rider. So I mean, it was obviously a song that held some cultural significance for the Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda who created Easy Rider, and the lyrics are fairly straight. I mean, it's a pro individual,
Oh, absolutely.
Individualist.
Do
song.
your own thing, kind of song.
And I think that the sentiment was kind of co-opted a few years later by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young for the song "Almost Cut My Hair." Mm-hmm. Because in If 6 Was 9, Hendrix sings, if all the hippies cut off their hair, I don't care, and he's, I've got my own world to live through. I don't need to copy you. He says, I'm going to wave my freak flag high. I mean, I think those words might actually be some of the lyrics of Almost Cut My Hair, which didn't come out till like 3 years later. At least 2 years later.
I mean, attributed as the origin of the saying, let your freak flag fly, which is a very common phrase today for, people, whether it be in the, in the Pride movement or anybody that's pushing, look, you got to live your own life, let your freak flag fly. I mean, it came from, that was the origin in this Hendrix song. So, some other lyrics that always kind of caught my attention in this. One was the notion of, it's like, look, I'm the one that has to die when I die. And if I'm the one that's going to have to die, then you got to let me live my life. You got to let me live the way that I want to live. Is in there. I mean, clearly just a strong statement about, people should live their lives the way that they want to live them, and they shouldn't be listening to other people or norms or rules or whatever dictating how people should live their lives.
And that's definitely true. I mean, and it's not really any more complicated than that. That's what he's singing about. And while the song itself is more complex, and there's a lot more going on there, it's kind of hard to describe. I mean, he's using a variety of guitar effects that were innovative at the time. I couldn't tell you what the equipment that he was using or the process he was using to create some of these songs. I mean, people can go, you can find this stuff on the internet about some of these kind of details. But going back to the whole let your freak flag fly, I mean, freak was a word that was being tossed around pretty regularly in the late 60s in a variety of different ways. And, way back when, I mean, if you were a freak, it's sort of, you like the Elephant Man was a freak, or you go to the circus and the bearded lady.
It's a freak show.
It was a freak show. And, but as in the late 60s, I think, it was more just if you were different. And the idea of if, when a group of people they weren't bearded women or the Elephant Man, but they were just a bunch of people that were hanging out together, and their hair was different, the clothes they wore were different, the way they talked was different. Yeah. Well, I dig the freaks, Well, Frank Zappa's first album, which I believe came out before this, was Freak Out. Yeah. And talk about that. And, there's a part in the Woodstock movie where the townspeople are interacting with some of the people coming to the concert. And one of the concert goers, a guy with some long hair, I mean, nice enough guy, but he refers to himself as freaks. We're freaks.
Yeah.
And the town guy says, well, why do you say that? Why do you call yourself a freak? He said, well, I don't know. I guess, he says, I'm not saying there's anything negative about the word freak. And I think that's kind of what Hendrix is saying. You can be yourself. And if it freaks some people out, no pun intended, well, that's their problem.
And I think he actually goes a step further. There's a line that catches my attention here, that there's a certain amount of power in living that way. And the line is, you can't dress like me. So if I'm sitting here, again, you got your freak clothing on, you've got a ripped, army coat on and, patch things, whatever. It's like, if I want to, I can put a suit on and walk down the street. But you will never be able to dress like me and walk in front of anybody you know. There's a certain amount of power that comes with living that. I thought was interesting as well. You can't dress like me was a line that caught my attention.
Go on, Mr. Businessman. You can't dress like me. Well, and that's I agree with you. Although tell that to John Fetterman. So, in any case, well, there we. That is the last song on the side, and Hendrix, as I said, went on to release Electric Ladyland, which is a big album. Also released Band of Gypsies, which was a live album recorded with a different band. The Band of Gypsies was Billy Cox, who was Hendrix's friend from the Army, on bass, and then Buddy Miles, a drummer who may have been in the Electric Flag, played drums. And that was recorded at a concert on New Year's Eve, 1969. So as the 60s moved into the 70s, Hendrix was performing live, and that concert was released, and that was the last recording that was released while he was still alive. Mm-hmm. The album Cry of Love came out, and he had been working on things after that concert. But and then in 1970 is when Hendrix passed on prematurely, and did a lot of stuff. But I think that this is just side one of Axis Bold as Love is just the perfect slice of what was going on with him when he was at his upward trajectory was at its peak.
Yep. Oh, I would totally agree. Just so much was happening, and he was sucking all that in and putting it out in this music. So great side. Great pick.
Sounds good. Well, sounds like we will talk next time.
All right. Take care, man.
Later, Mark.
Bye.